Mr. Speaker, before I proceed to make this presentation, I wish to convey our heartfelt appreciation to this august House on behalf of the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, for the cooperation and support of honorable members in the management of the economy over the past few months. It is our expectation that we continue to strengthen this relationship towards the achievement of our collective development goals. Mr. Speaker, I came straight here from the Jubilee House, and I'm happy to say that the President, like Caleb, is still as passionate and strong today about Ghana as he was as a young leader during the PMFJ days in 1977 and the Kumi Prego activities in 1995. He is just as vigorous to go into battle as he has exemplified in the Galamsey filth, poverty, in the Galamsey battle to rid our dear hill country of Galamsey filth, poverty, and corruption. I bring to this august House the President's strong greetings and that you continue to join him in the Lord's battle to bring progress and prosperity to all Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, the Lord has been merciful to us as a nation, and every morning I acknowledge the Lord. But our burden is heavy, and I ask for his favor and say like Moses, remember, Lord, that this nation is your people. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we can all testify that our nation has indeed come very far from the cloud of despondency and head-hanging to a renewed spirit of optimism and confidence, even in these 6 months, under the bold and focused leadership of President Akufo-Addo. Mr. Speaker, I am indeed blessed at this time to be Minister of Finance of our great republic. I have no doubt that President Akufo-Addo's administration will transform our nation and result in the greatest economic prosperity for all of our people. As I sit in my office, I worry about our courage to face the truth. But if we do not lay out ourselves in the service of mankind or of Ghana, whom then shall we serve? So we need to work harder, consciously, and face some truths as a collective. I read about a Methodist Reverend Ato Ahima. The author, Mr. Speaker, Order. 1863 to 1921. The author of the Gold Coast Nation and National Consciousness. And he wrote in the Gold Coast Methodist Times in 1897 the following, and I quote, "As a people, we have ceased to be a thinking nation. Our forebears, with all their limitations and disadvantages, had occasion to originate ideas and to contrive in their own order. They sowed incorruptible thought seeds, and we are reaping the rich harvest today. Though for the most part, we are scarcely conscious of the debt we owe them. Our national lives is semi-paralyzed, our mental machinery is dislocated, the inevitable consequence being, speaking generally, the resultant production of a race of men and women who think too little and talk too much. It is time, Mr. Speaker, to begin a national conversation on our values, our citizenhood, and in particular, our collective responsibility to protect the public purse. It is only when each of us, as citizens, protects the Republic, that these seeds for growth and jobs being sown by President Akufo-Addo will continue to yield 100-fold and more. The national conversation of a thinking nation, a nation that is slow to talk but quick to listen, should begin now. Mr. Speaker, on the 2nd of March 2017, I stood before this Honorable House to present to you the President's first budget statement, the Asempa budget. Which brought hope back to Ghanaians and sowed the seeds for growth, prosperity, and jobs. After the approval of the budget on 31st March 2016, we went to work in a hurry to deliver on the first important job of bringing back stability and predictability into the economy. So far, this has, Mr. Speaker, been reasonably achieved. Mr. Speaker, because of the prudent economic policies, improved fiscal discipline, and competent management of the economy, the macro indicators for the first half of the year are pointing in the right direction. Typical of the strengthening performance is the fact that for the first 6 months of the new Akufo-Addo government, both the fiscal deficit and primary balance outperformed their targets. The exchange rate is stabilizing, inflationary pressures have eased, and interest rates are trending downwards. Progressively, confidence is being restored in the economy, and we are confident that this positive trend will be sustained in the months and years ahead. Achieving macroeconomic stability is not an end in itself. What it has done, however, is to provide the country, especially the private sector, with a platform to grow the economy, create jobs, and improve incomes for workers. Mr. Speaker, through the cooperation of this august House, for which we are very grateful, we passed the Income Tax Amendment Act 2017, Act 941, the Customs and Excise Petroleum Taxes and Petroleum-Related Levies, Repeal Act 2017, Act 943, the Special Import Levy Amendment Act 2017, Act 944, the Energy Sector Levies Amendment Act 2017, Act 947, Value Added Tax Amendment Act 2017, Act 948, and the Earmark Funds Capping and Realignment Act 2017, Act 947, Special Petroleum Tax Amendment Act 2017, Act 942, and Customs Amendment Act 2017, Act 947. This is an incredible amount of work, and we thank the honorable members for this. Mr. Speaker, as a result and in fulfillment of the President's promise, government has abolished the 1% special import levy, which was imposed mainly on imported raw materials and machinery, abolished the 17.5% VAT NHIL on financial services, abolished the 17.5% VAT NHIL imposed on airline tickets, abolished the excise duty on petroleum to reduce the excess burden on final customers, reduced the special petroleum tax from 17.5% to 15% to mitigate the excess burden on final consumers, abolished the 5% VAT flat rate on the sale of real estate, abolished import duty on spare parts, exempted from tax the gains from realization of securities listed. Mr. Speaker, with this background and in accordance with the PFM Act, my presentation of this mid-year fiscal policy review will focus on the following broad thematic areas: an overview of recent macroeconomic developments, an update of macroeconomic forecasts contained in the 2017 budget, an analysis of the total revenue, expenditure, and financing performance, a presentation of a revised 2017 macro-fiscal framework, and the implications of the revised budget outlook for the medium-term fiscal and expenditure framework, and key highlights of 2017 budget implementation. Updates on macro developments in 2016. Mr. Speaker, in the 2017 budget, We provided information on macro fiscal developments for the 2016 fiscal year. We, however, now have updated information, which has resulted in the revision of some of the macro fiscal variables for 2016. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, let me provide updates on these macroeconomic indicators. GDP growth. Provisional data released by the Ghana Statistical Service in April 2017 showed that real GDP growth for 2016 was 3.5% against the provisional estimate of 3.6% reported in the 2017 budget, and lower than the 3.8% recorded for 2015, the lowest in over 15 years. The services sector, which though was the best growth performer in 2016, recorded a growth of barely 5.7%, followed by the agriculture sector growing at 3%, and the industry sector, which contracted by 1.4%. The economy we inherited, Mr. Speaker, was severely impaired. Mr. Speaker, on the fiscal front, updated information shows that the end 2016 fiscal deficit was worse than previously estimated, at 9.3% of GDP compared to the provisional figure of 8.7% of GDP on cash basis at the time of presenting the 2017 budget. This represents the worst performance since the record deficit of 2012, essentially questioning where progress was made over the previous 4 years to get the economy going. The deficit on commitment basis is now at 10.9% of GDP, up from 10.3% previously reported. This revision has been occasioned by the reversal of interest payment or the non-marketable instrument that fell due at the end of 2016 but recorded as part of 2017 flows, as well as a revision of the 2016 GDP by the Ghana Statistical Services in April 2017. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, the country has unfortunately accumulated a large amount of debt, which resulted in the country being at a high risk of debt distress and putting our economic development in jeopardy. From a debt stock of $9.5 billion at the end of 2008, it increased to $122.3 billion at the end of 2016, an increase of debt stock, Mr. Speaker, by 1,154%. The debt servicing payments arising from this legacy of debt accumulation amounts to some 45% of total domestic revenue. Unfortunately, our economy will have to live with this burden for some time as we make efforts to repair the damage. The revised 2016 nominal GDP of $167.3 billion puts the public debt to GDP ratio at 73.1% of GDP against the 72.5% reported in the 2017 budget presented to this House earlier this year. Mr. Speaker, we inherited a weak economy characterized by characterized by high fiscal deficit, 9.3% of GDP on a cash basis against the then target of 5% on a cash basis. A primary deficit, Mr. Speaker, of 1.4% of GDP against a target surplus of 1.2%. A high debt to GDP ratio, 73.1% of GDP. High inflation, 15.4%. Low credit to the private sector. High interest rate, 91-day T-bill rates at 16.4%. Weak domestic revenue mobilization. Low external reserves of 2.8 months of import cover. Policy reversals, including some unconstrained expenditure, $7 billion of outstanding commitments and undischarged obligations, and weak economic growth, 3.5%, lowest in 15 years. But, Mr. Speaker, permit me to reassure this August House that the Akufo-Addo government is not daunted by these dreadful statistics that were passed on to us. Mr. Speaker, to put the performance of the economy in the first half of 2017 into perspective, it will be useful to remind ourselves of the macroeconomic targets we set for ourselves for the 2017 fiscal year based on overall macroeconomic objectives of government. Consistent with our medium-term development priorities, the macroeconomic framework for 2017 aims at ensuring macroeconomic stability, shifting the focus of economic management from taxation to production, protecting the preferential option for the poor, and making the machinery of government work to deliver the benefits of progress for all Ghanaians. Anchored on the medium-term macroeconomic framework, the specific macroeconomic targets set for 2017 were as follows: overall GDP growth rate of 6.3%, non-oil GDP growth rate of 4.6%, end-year inflation rate of 11.2%, average inflation rate of 12.4%, overall fiscal deficit of 6.5% of GDP, a primary surplus of 0.4% of GDP, and gross foreign assets to cover at least 3 months of imports of goods and services. Mr. Speaker, developments from January up to June 2017 indicate that the President's policies and programs are yielding the expected results, and in some cases, exceeding expectations. The GDP for the first quarter of 2017 grew by 6.6% against 4.4% for the same period in 2016. Inflation reduced to 12.1% at the end of June 2017 from 15.4% at end December 2016. Interest rates are on the decline. For example, the 91-day Treasury bill rates have reduced from 16.4% at end 2016 to 12.08% at end June 2017. The fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP for the period January to June 2017 was 2.7% compared with a deficit of 4% over the same period in 2016. The primary surplus for January to June 2016 was 0.6% of GDP compared to a deficit of 1.3% over the same period in 2016. And the gross international reserves at the end of June 2017 was $5.9 billion, the equivalent of 3.4 months of import cover, up from $4.9 billion at the end of December 2016, equivalent to 2.8 months of import cover. Mr. Speaker, interest rates have responded to government's economic policies and are now trending downwards. The Bank of Ghana reduced its monetary policy rate MPR by 450 basis points from January to July 2017, 200 basis points from 25.5% to 23.5% in March 2017, by 100 basis points in May to 22.5%, and further by 150 basis points to 21% in July 2017. The trend of lower interest rates we are seeing is in direct response to the equally consistent declines in headline inflation and inflation expectations, and the general improvements in the macroeconomic fundamentals. In response, the average interest rate on the 91-day bill has declined since December 2016 from 16.81% to 12.10% in June 2017, while the rates on the 182-day Treasury bill rate fell from 18.5% in December 2016 to 13.28% in June 2016. Mr. Speaker, fiscal policy in the 2017 budget was designed to restore confidence in the economy, ensure fiscal and debt sustainability, and promote overall macroeconomic stability. The overall fiscal deficit was 2.7% of GDP against a target of 3.5%. The primary balance for the period was a surplus of 0.6% of GDP against a targeted deficit of 0.01%. The lower than program deficit resulted from both revenues and expenditures falling below their respective targets. Total revenue and grants fell below target by 14.9%, and total expenditure, including the clearance of arrears, was consequently aligned to match revenue inflows and thus was below target by 16.7%. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for the period amounted to $17.5 billion, 8.6% of GDP, against a target of $20.5 billion, 10.1% of GDP. In nominal terms, the provisional outturn was 6.5% higher than the outturn during the same period in 2016, as shown in Appendix Table 4. Ongoing investigations at the ports have unearthed significant under-declaration amounting to short payments of some $1.2 billion, inclusive of penalty. We are determined to tackle that criminal culture and expect compliance and examination officers to carry out their activities with diligence and honesty or face the consequences. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure amounted to $2.4 billion, 1.2% of GDP, 81.8% of the period target of $2.9 billion, 1.4% of GDP. Foreign finance capital spending was, however, higher than target due mainly to improved project loan disbursements. Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2016, new arrears of some $5 billion had been accumulated, bringing the total arrears that should be cleared to $7 billion. As I indicated in the 2017 budget statement, we are undertaking an audit of these arrears, which is expected to be completed by October 2017, striving to eliminate all government arrears by end 2019, following the outcome of an audit of the outstanding commitments generated at the end of 2016 and institute stringent measures that will prevent the accumulation of new ones. To this end, the clearance of arrears will be expedited in the second half of the year to ensure that the risk that these arrears pose, especially our financial sector, is minimized. Mr. Speaker, the audit is expected to be completed in October 2017. Mr. Speaker, the cash fiscal deficit of $5.6 billion, 2.7% of GDP, compared to $6.7 billion, 4% of GDP, recorded in the same period in 2016. This was financed mainly from domestic sources and included a drawdown on government deposits with the Bank of Ghana. Total net domestic financing amounted to 5.5 billion Ghana cedis, while net foreign financing amounted to 76.8 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the primary balance recorded a surplus of 0.6% of GDP against a target deficit of 0.01%, an indication that our fiscal effort is on track. This should ensure a lower rate of debt accumulation. Mr. Speaker, the petroleum receipts in the first half of 2017 amounted to $277.79 million compared to the year-end projection of $515.57 million. The revenue accrued from the Ghana Group's first and second 10 liftings, as well as the 35th to 37th Jubilee Field liftings. The proceeds for the first 10 and 35th Jubilee liftings undertaken in December 2016 were achieved in the first quarter of 2017. Mr. Speaker, in nominal terms, the gross public debt stock stood at a provisional figure of $138.5 billion, $31.7 billion as at the end of June 2017. The stock comprised external and domestic debt of $74.6 billion and Ghana cedis $63.9 billion, respectively. Mr. Speaker, contrary to the annual average rate of debt accumulation of 36.7% per annum over the last 8 years, the rate of accumulation over the last 6 months is only about 13.3%. This signifies an important shift, indicating government's seriousness to bringing our debt situation under control. Mr. Speaker, as of end of March 2017, the debt to GDP ratio was estimated to be 70.9%, and given the current trend, we expect the ratio to be around 71% by the end of the year once all the effects of this year's debt reprofiling have materialized. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that while we do not expect the debt reprofiling to add to the existing stock of debt, it is expected, however, that the stock of debt should increase marginally by the already programmed net financing of this year's budget deficit. Mr. Speaker, the medium-term debt management strategy for 2017-2019 is in fulfillment of Section 59 of the Public Financial Management Act 2016, Act 921, and is the first to be prepared under the Act. Mr. Speaker, the chosen strategy is in line with the debt management objectives of borrowing at a minimum cost and maintaining a prudent degree of risk while helping to develop the domestic capital market. It envisages increased interest by non-resident investors in the domestic bond market. Government intends to lower borrowing costs, minimize the growth of short-term domestic debt, and lengthen the maturity profile of domestic debt under the reprofiling program. The net result of this strategy should reduce the rollover refinancing risk and broaden the range of instruments offered in the domestic market. It is important to recognize that reprofiling does not add to public debt, and we intend to do more to ease the debt burden. It remains our expectation, Mr. Speaker, this August House especially, will be united in supporting government efforts to reprofile a significant portion of our national debt stock. Mr. Speaker, we are also tackling the huge pileup of arrears in the energy sector, which continues to impact negatively on our economy. It stifles the capacity of players in the power sector to keep our lights on. It denies the banks liquidity and in all frustrates economic activity and growth. That was why streamlining the energy sector legacy debt was made a priority policy initiative in the 2017 budget statement. As indicated, revenue streams from the energy sector levies ESLA will be used to ensure certainty of cash flows for the payment of all corresponding debts. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, 2 joint lead managers have been appointed to establish a special purpose vehicle to issue a domestic medium to long-term energy bond by securitizing the ESLA receivables. Mr. Speaker, since the presentation and approval of the 2017 budget statement and economic policy by this August House in March, there have been some developments, both externally and domestically, which have necessitated a revision in the 2017 fiscal framework consistent with Section 28(2)(d) of the PFM Act. We present the revised budget for the rest of the 2017 fiscal year. The revised assumptions for the 2017 mid-year review relate specifically to non-oil tax revenues and non-oil related expenditures. Mr. Speaker, following the performance of non-oil tax revenues for the first 6 months of the year, the assumptions underlying the projections for some tax types, namely corporate income tax, import VAT, and import duty, are being revised. Together, these amount to 1.5 billion, 0.7% of GDP. To ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we do not compromise our fiscal consolidation objectives and targets, expenditures are planned to match the downward revision in revenues. The downward revision in revenues and expenditure, as well as reclassification of inflows from the sale of shares, have resulted in the revision of the fiscal deficit target from 6.5% of GDP to 6.3%. These revisions are consistent with our fiscal and debt sustainability objectives. Mr. Speaker, be mindful of the high debt burden which has arisen largely because of high fiscal deficit in the past. The revision of the fiscal deficit further demonstrates our commitment to fiscal discipline. Mr. Speaker, going forward, we will strengthen the implementation of revenue measures to ensure that we meet our revised revenue targets. To ensure that the fiscal objectives and targets are not compromised, we will make the necessary downward adjustment to discretionary expenditure in the event that we are not able to meet our revenue targets. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grant has been revised downwards by 0.9% of GDP from 44.5 billion to 43.1 billion. As earlier stated, the revision to total revenues and grants emanates from revisions made to corporate income tax, import VAT, import duty, as well as the reclassification of expected non-tax revenue inflows from the sale of government shares of 500 million as financing. Expenditures has also been revised downwards by 1.1% of GDP from 58.1 billion to 55.9 billion as shown in Appendix Table 5. The key revisions to expenditure include 0.4% of GDP, adjustment to goods and services, 867 million, 0.3% of GDP, reduction in total transfers to other government units, which comprise all statutory and earmarked funds, 553.2 million, and 0.3% of GDP, 683 million, adjustment to capital expenditure. Mr. Speaker, despite the measures being taken to ensure that we maintain fiscal discipline, government remains strongly committed to investing in infrastructure, growing the economy, and delivering social services to our people through strategic allocation and efficient use of resources. Our social welfare programs, such as the free SHS, NHIS, school feeding, LEAP, and other socio-economic ones, such as planting for food and jobs, etc., will be protected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following these adjustments, the overall fiscal balance is expected to improve from a deficit of 13.2 billion Ghana cedi, 6.5% of GDP, to 12.8 billion, 6.3% of GDP. Total financing of the deficit will comprise a net foreign repayment of 1.3 billion, while net domestic financing will amount to 14.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, the resulting primary balance from the adjustment in revenues, expenditures, and financing is a primary surplus equivalent to 0.2% of GDP, gross domestic product. Mr. Speaker, even though the projected real GDP growth of 6.3% for 2017 has not been revised, the nominal GDP has been revised downwards from 203.4 billion to 202.01 billion, reflecting mainly the revision of the deflator downwards. Mr. Speaker, based on the above considerations, the revised macroeconomic targets are summarized below. Overall GDP growth rate is maintained at 6.3%, with nominal GDP revised slightly to 202 billion from the original projection of 203.41 billion. Non-oil growth rate maintained at 4.6%, end-year inflation rate is maintained at 11.2%. Overall fiscal deficit has been revised downwards from 6.5% of GDP to 6.3% of GDP. Primary balance has been revised from a surplus of 0.4% of GDP to a surplus of 0.2% of GDP. And gross foreign assets to cover at least 3 months of imports of goods and services remain the same as originally programmed. Mr. Speaker, these revisions are consistent with government's resolve to grow the economy and create jobs whilst maintaining macroeconomic stability through fiscal discipline and prudent economic policies. We will strengthen our collaboration with the private sector to address issues such as taxes, energy, and cost of credit that impede their growth and expansion. Mr. Speaker, as a demonstration of our commitment to fiscal discipline, government has taken a decision to introduce a numerical fiscal rule to guide the implementation of fiscal policy. In this regard, we will bring to this House an amendment to the PFMA Act to limit the fiscal deficit within a range of 3 to 5% of GDP for any fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, some highlights of the 2017 budget. Mr. Speaker, please permit me to now provide you with updates on implementation of some of the major programs for the 2017 fiscal year. Planting for Food and Jobs program. Mr. Speaker, in fulfillment of our promise to Ghanaians, we launched the Planting for Food and Jobs program to increase production, ensure food security, as well as to create jobs. As at June 2017, about 185,907 farmers, out of a total of 200,000 farmers targeted for the 2017 cropping season, were registered. The farmers are being provided with seeds, fertilizers, and extension services to improve their yields. During the same period, Mr. Speaker, a total of 56,028 bags of improved seeds of maize, rice, soybean, and sorghum, as well as 22,900 sachets of onions, tomatoes, and pepper, were distributed to beneficiary farmers across the 10 regions of Ghana. Mr. Speaker, fertilizer is also being provided at a subsidized rate of 50% to participating farmers. I'm happy to announce that the reports we are receiving suggest that the fertilizer is getting to its intended beneficiaries and at a reduced price. Beneficiary farmers pay 25% of the subsidized price before collection and 25% of the subsidized price before collection and harvest. As of June 2017, a total of 61,568 metric tons out of 156,000 metric tons, 3 million bags was supplied, representing 39.4% of the target. Distribution of fertilizer is ongoing, especially in the 3 northern regions. Mr. Speaker, a total of 822 agricultural extension personnel trained by the agricultural colleges who had been unemployed were recruited and posted to 187 districts across the 10 regions of the country. Mr. Speaker, the incidence of the fall armyworm invasion, which was first reported in April 2016, posed a challenge to increase food production. A total of 112,000 hectares of crops were infested, out of which 14,411 hectares were severely affected. The most affected crops were maize and cowpea. Government responded by setting up a national task force and subcommittees to create awareness and take steps to control the spread of the menace. Over 74,000 liters of various chemicals were procured and distributed to all the 216 districts in the country. It is the objective of government to reverse this declining trend and to increase production to more than 1 million tons per annum within the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, Ghana Cocoa Board has rolled out the artificial pollination programs which are aimed at increasing productivity of cocoa farmers from an average yield of 450 kilograms per hectare to over 1,000 kilograms per hectare. Cocoa Board has trained and deployed 10,000 hand pollinators to assist farmers. It is projected that 24,000 hectares of farms will be pollinated in 2017 with an expected increase to 30,000 hectares in the next 3 years. Mr. Speaker, in light of the estimated 22% of the country's current cocoa trees are classified as overage moribund or CSSVD infected, Cocoa Board, with support from government, has continued the cocoa rehabilitation program. The Speaker, Cocoa Board has also reformed the mass cocoa spraying to involve greater private sector participation and farmer ownership. Mr. Speaker, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire produce about 60% of the world's cocoa and face common challenges in production, and marketing of the beans, to which individual country-specific solutions are not sufficient to remedy. Mr. Speaker, under the determined leadership of His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo and his Ivorian counterpart, His Excellency Alassane Ouattara, the Ghana-Cote d'Ivoire cooperation has been renewed and energized, leading to a meeting in April in Abidjan, followed by a second meeting in Accra in June 2017. The meetings have set out the framework of the cooperation and worked out details of its implementation. The implementation decisions and initial successes so far include a common strategy, anti-smuggling initiative, a funding arrangement to undertake critical projects in both countries, increasing use of cocoa butter equivalents, and formation of a new producer organization. Education. Mr. Speaker, a Ghanaian student is eligible to benefit from the free SHS policy if she writes the basic education certificate examination from 2017 and is placed by the computerized school selection and placement system into a publicly funded second cycle institution. Beneficiaries of this government scholarship will enjoy it for a period of 3 years. Foreigners are excluded from the free SHS. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the poor and the vulnerable are not left behind, students from disadvantaged backgrounds will be considered for placement. To prepare them adequately for a successful SHS program, special in-school tuition will be provided for them. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, 30% of vacancies in elite schools will be reserved for students from public junior high schools. Mr. Speaker, government is taking the necessary steps to ensure that the quality of education is not compromised as a result of the implementation of free SHS programs. In this regard, a number of interventions have been outlined as part of the implementation program. Notable amongst them are the following: provision of 4 core textbooks for all first-year students, rationalization of teacher deployment and training at the SHL level, optimization of instruction time by extending the school day. All health trainees in public training institutions will receive allowance starting 2017. The Ministry of Health has made provisions for 149 million Ghana cedis to pay for the 4 months ending December 2017. This will enable the health trainees concentrate on their education, reduce hardship especially on students from vulnerable and poor families, and avoid disruptions in the school curriculum system. Restructuring of the National Health Insurance Scheme. Mr. Speaker, the NHS has undergone several changes since its inspection. At the time this government took office, the scheme was facing challenges in claims management, e-claims, delays in processing of claims, coupled with other challenges in administration and management of the NHIA. The government promised to restructure NHIS and make it more efficient and effective. Mr. Speaker, a committee has been put in place to review the report and put together a plan for restructuring the scheme. LEAP implementation. Mr. Speaker, presently the LEAP program has 203,000 households in all 216 districts in all 10 regions of Ghana. Out of the 248,000 beneficiary households, 193,920 beneficiaries are registered and receive payment on the eSwitch platform operated by the Ghana Interbank Payment and Settlement System. The remaining beneficiary households are in the process of being registered onto the eSwitch platform. Total payments made from January 3rd to 31st July 2017 is 56,307,670 cedis. The government is currently working on a productive and financial inclusion strategy to facilitate the graduation of LEAP beneficiaries from cash transfer programs. School feeding. Mr. Speaker, the concept of the program is to provide children in selected public kindergartens and primary schools in deprived areas of the country with 1 hot, nutritious meal per school day using locally grown foodstuff. The immediate objectives of the program are increasing school enrollment, attendance and retention, reduce hunger and malnutrition, and boost domestic food production. The long term is to contribute to poverty reduction and food security in Ghana. Currently, the program feeds 1,671,777 children in 5,530 schools in all 216 districts and provides employment for over 4,730 caterers. Energy. Mr. Speaker, the energy sector, particularly the electricity subsector, has been a major challenge to the growth of the economy in the past years before we took over the administration of the country. The difficulties and unstable electricity supply had created significant constraints on industrial production and socio-economic activities in the country. Besides stabilizing the electricity supply, government has made significant progress with respect to the interventions that were promised in the 2017 budget statement. Government has taken steps, Mr. Speaker, to deal with the financial difficulties in the sector. Cabinet has approved the implementation of the cash waterfall mechanism, which together with the Energy Legacy Debt Restructuring Program is intended to resolve the perennial cash flow difficulties in the energy sector. Steps are being taken to implement the cash waterfall management immediately. Mr. Speaker, we inherited a power sector which had contracted so many power purchase agreements well beyond the country's demand, which had the potential to exacerbate the already dire financial crisis in the sector. As promised by His Excellency the President in the 2017 State of the Nation Address, Cabinet is deliberating the strategy paper submitted by the Ministry of Energy towards rationalizing the PPAs to ensure least cost power generation capacity additions. On the regulatory front, Cabinet has approved the establishment of the Electricity Market Oversight Panel, EMOP. The EMOP has been provided under the Electricity Regulations, LI 1937, but has not seen the light of day since 2008. The EMOP is to be inaugurated in August 2017 to begin implementation of its mandate. Mr. Speaker, one key intervention that government has promised in the 2017 budget was the restructuring of VRA to bring about increased operational efficiency and private sector investment in the power sector. Government has approved the VRA restructuring agenda submitted by the Ministry to Cabinet, and processes towards the implementation of the restructuring agenda have begun under the coordination of the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, in the renewable energy front, government has given approval to Bui Power to collaborate with Sino-Hydro to construct a 250-megawatt solar power facility to operate as a hybrid electricity generation source to complement the hydroelectricity so that Bui Power Plant can enhance its electricity generation capacity during off-peak periods. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, we inherited from the previous government liquefied natural gas supply contracts that were mispriced. Prices were higher than indigenous sources of gas and in some cases higher than the crude oil it was designed to displace. We have restructured and renegotiated the terms of LNG supply such that the price is now below that of indigenous gas and guaranteed for the long term to be below that of alternative fuels such as light crude oil. Our successful renegotiations of these LNG contracts will result, Mr. Speaker, in saving close to $1 billion US. Mr. Speaker, these initiatives are aimed at achieving reduction in the per kilowatt price of electricity for industry and households. Mr. Speaker, as part of government's effort to improve public mass transportation, the ministry initiated processes for the acquisition of buses for the 2 public bus companies. The objective is to improve the current bus fleet of Metromass and Intercity State Transport Corporation. In all, a total of 800 buses will be acquired. These include 200 compressed natural gas and 500 diesel buses for Metromass Transit and the remaining 100 buses for ISTC. Railway development. Mr. Speaker, The establishment of a Ministry of Railway Development was to address what the President has continuously described as one of the greatest tragedies of our post-colonial developments from the colonial legacy of 947 kilometers at independence. Barely 30% was operational in January 2017. The renewed interest that has been generated in the sector by over 200 companies, both local and foreign, expressing interest in participating in the redevelopment of the rail sector, more than justify the wisdom in setting up a ministry to focus on the redevelopment of the sector. Mr. Speaker, Tema to Akosombo has commenced and is projected to complete by mid-2020. On the Eastern Line, a feasibility study is ready to trigger a procurement process. On the Central Spine, we have commenced the process of procuring a consultant to undertake a feasibility. Roads and highways. Mr. Speaker, the ministry maintained its focus on routine and periodic maintenance activities to protect the huge investments made by government in the provision of the road sector. As at the end of June 2017, routine maintenance had been undertaken on 6,233 kilometers, 52% of the approved work plan of the trunk roads, 8,899 kilometers, 39% of the approved work plan on the feeder road network, and 6,000 kilometers, 59% of the approved work plan on the urban road network. Mr. Speaker, within the same period, periodic maintenance activities comprising re-graveling, spot improvement, and resealing work had been carried out on 199 kilometers, 100 kilometers of the approved work plan, and 180 kilometers on the trunk, feeder, and urban road networks, respectively. Periodic maintenance activities on the urban roads were mostly focused on resealing and asphalt overlay, which works saw 100 kilometers of road asphalted in MMDAs such as Tema and Accra. Minor rehabilitation work covering minor upgrading and the construction of culverts and drainage systems have been carried out. Mankasim Abura Dunkwa, in Koko New Aburim, Pong Katamansu and Gulf City area, Third Ring Road in Tamale, asphaltic overlay of 50 kilometers of road, Aifua area roads, Kwem Nyohegbe Wegbi feeder roads phase 2, Ainaso Daimanyim phase 1 road. These have been 100% completed. The development activities undertaken, including rehabilitation, reconstruction, construction of bridges, and upgrading, the details of progress on some of the projects are shown below. In Sawama Peja Road, Taku Bogoso, Aguna Junction, Elubo, Ayamfura, Sanwinso, Wa and Han, Kaswa Interchange and Ancillary, dualization of Ho Main, construction of Ho Bypass, Bogatanga Boku Polmakong, Inquanta Utidamango, 50 kilometers extra, and Brekum Siapa. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry's public-private partnership program for the financing, construction, and management of road infrastructure is progressing steadily. Currently, the pre-feasibility study of the Accra-Takoradi project is being updated, while that for Accra-Tema is almost completed. Mr. Speaker, government has secured a 48.85 million loan from the Africa Development Bank to improve sanitation conditions in the Greater Accra region in a 5-year project. Government is also focused on delivering improved sanitation for all, consistent with the Sustainable Development Goal 6 through its key initiatives such as Water for All and Toilets for All. A sector-wide strategic plan has been completed, setting a roadmap on how to address the constraints confronting the sector and how to overcome them. Combating galamsey, illicit mining. Mr. Speaker, the previous piecemeal attempt of solving the challenge of illicit mining in the country has not seen any significant result. The government has therefore put together a 5-year project called Multilateral Mining Integration Project. This will address the problem over the 5-year period creating over 500,000 job opportunities in phases, training 100,000 small-scale miners, reclaiming 7,140 kilometers of total land size in Ghana, prospecting of 2,500 kilometers, build skills for employment, create 100,000 jobs, and create 20,000 acres of oil palm plantation. Currently, government has constituted a 7-member ministerial team to provide a medium-term solution. Government has already disbursed 56 million to an emergency program. Most of the degraded areas have been tested for mercury levels and are ready for reclamation. Over 3,000 floating platforms on most of the rivers in Ashanti, Eastern, Central, Western, and Brown Harbour regions have been removed from those rivers. More than 1,300 earth-moving equipment have also been taken out from the sites. Our rivers are showing signs of improvement, thereby returning our treatment plants back to work. YEA. Mr. Speaker, the agency with approximately 62,000 beneficiaries have since June this year introduced beneficiary time sheets to address the practice whereby beneficiaries are paid without any records of work done. The agency is ensuring value for money, protecting the public purse and efficiency, and has increased the beneficiaries' monitoring assistance from 256 to 600. The agency has started a process to recruit, Mr. Speaker, over 60,000 unemployed youth under the following models: youth in security, youth in afforestation, youth in graduate internship, youth in paid internship, and youth in sanitation. Establishment of the Zongo Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, broad consultations with relevant stakeholders were undertaken towards the establishment of the Zongo Development Fund. A total of 3,548 stakeholders, including members of parliament, development partners, traditional rulers, Zongo chiefs, youth leaders, MMDAs, representatives of political parties, were consulted. Cabinet has granted approval for the policy. The bill will be submitted to Parliament before the end of the year. Mr. Speaker, work has started on a number of initiatives in the 2017 budget to empower the private sector. Mr. Speaker, after years of unstable power supply, doomsday, and macroeconomic instability, businesses, especially manufacturing, were negatively impacted. As part of the response, a quick disbursing stimulus fund has been created to support distressed but viable companies. To date, over 350 applications have been received, out of which 80 have been selected for support in the first phase of the program. The second phase of the exercise is ready to commence. Mr. Speaker, under the government's industrial transformation agenda, the implementation of the One District, One Factory, 1D, 1F initiative has commenced. A program implementation framework which sets the modalities of implementation has been prepared. To date, the technical support group for the program has already reviewed 234 businesses for the IDYF initiative. About 59% of these applications are from the manufacturing sector, while 33% are from the agribusiness sector. It is envisaged that more than 50 districts will start actual implementation of the enterprises by year end, with the potential to generate about 80,000 direct and indirect jobs. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve the business environment to make the country an attractive destination for investments and make Ghana the most business-friendly nation in Africa, a comprehensive program for business regulatory reform has been launched. This includes the following: reforms at improving Ghana's ranking on World Bank Ease of Doing Business, establishing an electronic register for business regulations, conduct a rolling review of business regulations to ensure real-time response to regulatory reforms, design targeted regulatory reliefs for SMEs in order to reduce entry barriers for young entrepreneurs and startups, and establish regulatory reform units within MDAs to conduct regulatory impact assessments. This will lead to the creation of a permanent system of quality control for the introduction of new business regulation. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has launched the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Plan to support startup and early-stage businesses with a seed capital of the Ghana cedi equivalent of $10 million. The NEIP will include business development services, incubator hubs, and business accelerator services. Infrastructure for poverty eradication. Mr. Speaker, the promise to tackle infrastructure challenges in the at the constituency level, especially in rural and deprived communities, is very much on course. The Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program will deliver the One District, One Factory, One Village, One Dam, small business development, agriculture infrastructure, water for all projects, and sanitation projects. Other constituency-based infrastructure projects, including culverts, school buildings, and community-based health planning and services compound, will also be funded under IPEP. Establishment of the development authorities. Mr. Speaker, we commence the process to establish the development authorities to ensure that the IPEP and other local initiatives are implemented in a well-coordinated manner. The three bills for the establishment of the three development authorities, namely Northern Development Authority to take care of the Upper East, Upper West, and Northern regions, Middle Belt Development Authority for the Ashanti, Eastern, and the Brong-Ahafo regions, and the Coastal Development Authority for the Volta, Greater Accra, Central, and Western regions, will be laid before this August House shortly. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry has set up a committee to carry out an extensive study and recommend legislative reviews necessary to ensure the election of our MMDCEs. A roadmap has been developed to guide the legislative reviews and stakeholder consultation toward election of MMDCEs. His Excellency the President has also announced during the orientation of MMDCEs the appointment of the current MMDCEs was the last in Ghana. Mr. Speaker, progress has also been made on all three components aimed at formalizing the economy. These are the National Digital Property Addressing System, the National Identification Scheme, and the Interoperability of Banking and Mobile Communication Platform. Various technical committees were constituted to prepare a roadmap for the implementation of these projects, subsequent to which service providers have been and are being selected. Government is on course to completing the National Digital Property Addressing System, upon which the issuance of national identity cards will commence in October 2017. The interoperability project is also scheduled for completion by end 2017. Mr. Speaker, our commitment in the financial services sector is to implement reforms to strengthen the pensions and insurance industry to ensure the availability of cheaper long-term capital for the private sector. Over the past 6 months, we have finalized the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which aims to increase access to finance from the current national average of 58% to 75% by 2023. We are also working to commit 20% of the proceeds from the G20 Compact of Africa to strengthen the financial sector, focusing on venture capital financing and support for small and medium-scale industries. Mr. Speaker, as of April 2017, the banking sector comprised 33 universal banks with a combined network of 1,377 branches across the country. Despite the strong performance of the banking sector for the first 4 months of the year, as evidenced by the improved performance in asset growth, the sector is still threatened by the high non-performing loans. We are, however, confident that with the planned issuance of the energy sector bond in the coming months, the non-performing loans ratio will improve significantly and with increased liquidity, our banks will be in a better position to deliver cheaper credit to the private sector. Over the past 6 months, we have started the process of lengthening and normalizing the yield curve, lowering benchmark interest rates, and pursuing macroeconomic stability to position the capital markets for growth. Specifically, government introduced the 15-year fixed benchmark bond aimed at lengthening the maturity profile of the domestic debt and, more importantly, to serve as a reference benchmark for pricing of corporate issuance. Activities in the secondary market on the Ghana fixed income market have been very encouraging, with about 21 corporate bonds having liquidity premium decline from 2.48 basis points in April 2016 to 1.46 basis points in April 2017. Interest on the decline, especially on short-term instruments, and contributing to the normalization of the yield. The equity capital market also recorded encouraging performance for the first half of the year. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index closed at 1,964.55 points in June 2017 from 1,689.1 points in December 2016, a 16.3% increase year to date. Mr. Speaker, in April 27, workers who had failed to biometrically register with SSNIT had their salaries suspended. Preparatory works are also ongoing to interface the government payroll of SSNIT biometric database, as well as register the government Cap 30 workers on the SSNIT biometric database before the end of the year. In order, Mr. Speaker, to implement the Treasury Single Account in compliance with provisions in the PFMA Act, a liquidity impact assessment of the closure of accounts to commercial banks was completed and the impact found to be minimal. We have therefore begun the process to close all Government of Ghana bank accounts with commercial banks and transfer balances to the central banks. Closed accounts at commercial banks currently stand at 1,985, and the remaining 2,000 accounts is expected to be closed by September 2017. Wage negotiations, Mr. Speaker. In the spirit of completing the 2018 wage negotiations by end April 2017 as required by the PFM Act, we are glad to inform the House that through the tireless effort of the National Tripartite Committee comprising organized labor and associations, employers association, and government, the 2018 National Daily Minimum Wage was determined. Similarly, the 2018 Public Sector Base Pay has been successfully negotiated by the Public Sector Joint Standing Negotiating Committee to increase by 11% for the 2018 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, we would like to use the occasion to express our deepest appreciation to organized labor and associations and employers association for their effective collaboration with government to conclude wage negotiations for 2018, way ahead of the preparation of the 2018 budget. This development will certainly enhance the predictability of the fiscal impact of wage adjustment on the budget. Mr. Speaker, we've also agreed to begin a national conversation with labor to improve its social contracts with government and bring productivity as a key variable for labor negotiations. Mr. Speaker, as part of government's plans to attract foreign investment, government has signed a number of double taxation agreements with countries including Mauritius, Morocco, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and Singapore. Already we are seeing positive signs of greater investor interest from these countries. Mr. Speaker, improved development cooperation. Government over the past 6 months has taken deliberate steps to re-engage and repair our relationship with our development partners to facilitate development cooperation. We have institutionalized new engagement modalities and platforms to ensure a more open and transparent dialogue. This has led to a restoration of confidence in and support for our economic development agenda. We are witnessing increased financial support and commitment to our development programs. Mr. Speaker, given that economic performance was off track in 2016 and the IMF program was severely compromised, we expect to complete the program through our budget cycle of January 2018 through December 2018 to ensure that we meet the program objectives and targets. It is our expectation that the IMF board would meet in August 2017 to improve the fourth review of the program. Mr. Speaker, another milestone was our successful enrollment as a G20 Africa Compact country. Under the Compact, an MOU was signed with Germany, which will trigger a disbursement of 190 million euros. The proposed focal sectors of engagement of Germany are energy, renewable energy, complemented by technical and vocational training, and the financial sector. Mr. Speaker, we have signaled to the market that going forward, our strategy is to tap into non-debt structured financing deals that brings private capital to major infrastructure projects. A key example being the integrated aluminium industry deals championed by His Excellency the Vice President, which involves the development of our bauxite deposits. We will use this strategy to finance major infrastructure projects, including the construction of the Eastern and Central Red Lines and extension of rails to Paga. Mr. Speaker, in March, when I presented the budget, I indicated that we're going through the process of determining the actual state of the distressed economy and to turn it around. The President was elected to get to work with his team to fix a broken economy and to get Ghana working again. That was why our focus, Mr. Speaker, in the first half of the year was to stabilize the economy and re-establish the principles of good economic governance. We are rebuilding the walls of good economic governance. Our belief is that we need to protect the public purse, secure value for money for state resources, and spend the savings made to enhance the lives of those we were elected to serve. We want to provide good economic environment for businesses in particular, and to get Ghana working again. And I'm happy to say that the economy is now stable. Inflation is trending downward. The cedi has stabilized. Interest rates are lower, and there is a general feeling of optimism and hope. Now, that general feeling must be truly felt in the pockets and homes of the people. In 1969, our Prime Minister, Professor Buzia, insisted, and I quote, that the yardstick by which our success or failure should be judged must be the condition of the human being himself. The government is ready to be judged by the standard of living the Ghanaians are able to enjoy and by the degree of cooperation, harmony, and brotherliness in our community life as a nation. Unquote. We have spent our first 6 months in office going through a rigorous preparatory process for all the initiatives we announced. We have laid the foundation for successful implementation of our flagship projects, and we believe will turn around the fortunes of this country. The second half of the year will see commencement of actual implementation of our flagship programs. New businesses will be set up under our One District, One Factory program. Existing businesses will be stimulated and rejuvenated, and service delivery in state agencies like sanitation and power will see visible improvements. Our free SHS will be rolled out and will begin the scaling up of our infrastructure projects like rail and wrote, Mr. Speaker, we are putting in place measures to strengthen revenue performance to enable us achieve our objectives. In the spirit of prudent economic management, we have revised our expenditures whilst ensuring that we do not compromise on the promises we made Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, let me take this opportunity as I conclude to celebrate with this august House and our nation that on August 4th, this Friday, will be the 70th anniversary of the founding of the United Gold Coast Convention in Saltpond, led by two great men, Kra Grant and J.B. Dankwa. This, Mr. Speaker, was an era when the nation stood united in the fight for political and economic freedom. Mr. Speaker, 70 years is indeed significant, if not spiritual, and as destiny will have it, it is also at a time when the son of one of the founding fathers is also president of our nation. It is time, Mr. Speaker, to reconnect with total commitment to realizing the dreams of those illustrious stands. We have the strength and the prayers of a hopeful nation to fulfill our manifest destiny. It is time for all of us to take our Nehemiah roles and rebuild both the physical and moral walls of our nations and ourselves. As Kra Grant said at the launch of the UGCC in Saltpond that day, and I quote, "Remember that upon what you do today may depend the happiness of millions of our countrymen and women. But above all," he said, "remember this, we do and plan today. We do and plan not for ourselves alone here and now, but for our country, not only for the generation today, but for generations yet unborn." Mr. Speaker, I so present to this august House to take note of the revisions and so accordingly inform the mid-year fiscal policy review of the 2017 budget.